You really did it. That actually happened.
Asteroid City is terrifying in many ways, and one of them is the expectations that we have going into it. When we're watching a work created by an auteur like Wes Anderson, who is especially known for his stylistic trademark that takes so much of the spotlight, the question that we can't but keep asking ourselves is whether there is a possibility that he can continue to produce works with that same quality, and more importantly, ones that are of true substance, and not just recreations of the successes that preceded them. Now, Asteroid City amplifies that kind of sentiment like nobody's business. It's by far Wes Anderson's most abstract and hardest film to make sense of, and that makes it so vulnerable to the kind of doubts we're likely to have on its legitimacy. Many people are wondering whether Wes Anderson has run out of ideas and stories to tell and is now putting out films devoid of any meaning but vague enough to blur that line between what is actually deep and complex and what is just thinly veiled nonsense. It doesn't help that technically, Anderson can get away with such empty narratives simply for his very distinguishable and compelling visual style, making it easy to dismiss what he does as style over substance. And that's relevant today more than ever with the AI's supposed recreations of his aesthetics. Due to all of this, the reactions to the movie have been divided between those who appreciate its complexity and those who think it's shallow. But hate it or like it, what I find fascinating about Asteroid City is the fact that it addresses these very questions and anxieties, and that in a way makes it simultaneously embody those criticisms but also shield itself to them, creating some sort of a paradox. It feels less like an actual film and more like a part of a discussion that came right on time to join in on this discourse about itself, Wes Anderson's filmography, filmmaking and storytelling as a whole, and just the very concept of meaning and meaninglessness. A lot of the criticism towards Asteroid City comes from the feeling that what looks like the central story of the film is bland, and the characters are hard to connect with. But in this case, we should be careful with what to consider as the central story in the first place. Although it looks like it's about the grief of the main character, Augie, and his family over the loss of his wife, that's not really the full picture. From the very beginning, we're led to understand that this is a story within a story, a play within a film. And so if you feel distanced from the characters of the play, it's because they are purposefully designed to be incomplete and awkward, as they are simply an unfinished product made by a playwright who dies before he finishes the play, as we learned by the end of the movie. The real story here is a story about making the play, a story about making stories, if you want, and that gets literally spelled out to us in the very beginning of the movie.
Asteroid City does not exist. It is an imaginary drama created expressly for this broadcast.
And it doesn't just stop here. Asteroid City is Wes Anderson's most meta work, as it serves as a commentary on storytelling through a story about storytelling. So if your issue with the movie is the difficulty of making sense of its story, well then it's a film about exactly just that, the struggles that come with finding meaning in stories. And that creates this paradox where it feels meaningless and all over the place because it's about meaninglessness.
Isn't there supposed to be some kind of an answer out there in the cosmic wilderness? Woodrow's line about the meaning of life.
Let's take, for example, the most urgent question one can ask when watching Asteroid City or any movie, which is, what is it about? What is the meaning of this story? This is a question that both you, the viewer, and the characters of the film will be reflecting on together thanks to the framing device we mentioned earlier. So basically, any comment regarding the play reflects what goes on in the movie, since the line is blurry between these two levels of the story. And that's why we get constant interruptions to remind us that this is a play, these are actors, and Asteroid City doesn't exist. Those reminders make sure to keep the meta discussion in the film ongoing up to the point where it actually addresses the important question of what is the meaning of the play and the movie by extension.
What's it about, the play? Infinity?
Infinity sounds like a convincing answer because this movie is packed in every sense of the word, and that's where some of its criticism comes from. It's a story about grief, love, death, art, science, family, economy, quarantines, war, and the list goes on, making it hard to put our fingers on just one thing that ties it all together. And so it becomes somewhat fair to deem it as a movie about everything, but also nothing. Again, what's interesting about Asteroid City is that this could be valid criticism of it, but it's still something that gets addressed by the film itself. It's kind of the point. Similarly, the whole thing also seems like Wes Anderson's meditation on his own work and relation to filmmaking and storytelling. It looks like the questions we asked in the beginning about him finding art that's worth creating is something that he struggles with too. And we can find traces of his reflections in different characters of both the movie and the play. In addition to Infinity, the playwright admits that he doesn't know what else his play is going to be about, and that could apply to Wes Anderson himself and his work. We can come to the same conclusion with that line about having to always keep daring.
What's the cause? What's the meaning? Why do you always have to dare something?
That can be a reference to Anderson grappling with the question of why he should keep making art and what exactly he should be making. Again, the anxieties that I mentioned at the beginning are explicitly addressed in the movie and the play.
Maybe it's because I'm afraid.
We can go one layer down in our dissection of this movie to find its commentary not just on filmmaking, but the current state of the world, and how we're struggling to find meaning within it. Although the story takes place in the 1950s, it's still reflective of the anxieties prevalent in our current world. One of the most obvious parallels we can draw is the quarantine and the state of confinement and isolation that the characters had to deal with. Wes Anderson admitted that this aspect was naturally added to the film simply because everyone was going through it during the time of him writing the script for this movie, which only solidifies the idea that the movie is about everything, in no particular order and with no specific priorities. It's like a notebook that's filled with the director's thoughts and reflections. We can find more subtle parallels in the characters' interaction with everything taking place around them. There's this sense of normalcy we see in their response to things that are supposed to trigger stronger reactions, like the atomic bomb test or death, and that's something that marks the characters in Wes Anderson movies generally, but in this case we can read it as a commentary on humans' terrifying ability to coexist with the abnormal. These characters' indifference to their weird environment feels reminiscent of the way we got accustomed to living not only in a pandemic, but also in an age where privacy is more violated, for example, something that could be reflected in pictures taken without permission, not being a big deal.
You didn't ask permission.
I never ask permission.
And the characters' ability to spy on each other very easily.
Saw us through this window in your bedroom yesterday.
There's also a little instance that looks like a reference to our inability to own anything and only rent instead in the current economy.
You don't technically own anything outright.
All of these are bits and pieces that may or may not be intentionally commenting on our reality as well as that of the 1950s. As I said, it's hard to position these scattered elements of the play in places where they fit and all of it makes sense. Because just like the characters who struggle to find meaning in their lives due to their past and present traumas, the playwright himself didn't know how to create that kind of meaning or cohesion within the play, and after his death the actor couldn't find the meaning either. When we take it a step further, it becomes a reflection of the filmmaker Wes Anderson struggling to create meaning within his films. We take it a step even further and it becomes a reflection of our struggle finding meaning in life as a whole, especially in the current state of the world. How do we cope with that? The movie seems to offer an answer, at once for the actor who still doesn't understand the play near the end of the movie that we couldn't understand either.
I still don't understand the play.
Doesn't matter. Just keep telling the story.